Welcome back, or welcome if you're just joining us. This is the France 24 debate. We're looking at the prospects for a global deal on curbing carbon emissions. This after that surprise announcement of an agreement between the world's two worst polluters, the United States and China, on Wednesday. With us to talk about it, Peter Rowan, consultant in green finance and sustainable energy. Jean-Louis Shalansky, who is the president of the Union of French Petroleum Industries. And from Washington, Myron Ebel, director of the Center for Energy and Environment, a think tank that advocates a smaller government and a free enterprise. We saw in a report in part one of our discussion, and Peter Rowan mentioned it, there's going to be a changing of the guard in Washington soon. Central to the discussion is James Inhofe, the senior senator from Oklahoma, the next chair of the Environment Committee. And Myron Ebel, explain this to us for people on this side of the Atlantic. Does he really believe that it's written in the Bible, the fact that there's no global warming?
I don't know. I know Senator Inhofe fairly well, and I've listened to him often over the years. I've never heard him say that, but I would say this about him. He is not a denier in the sense that he denies that the climate changes or that human beings have an influence on it.
He said it was a hoax that was perpetrated by the United Nations and George Soros.
He said that the Kyoto agenda to ration energy, fossil fuel energy, was the greatest hoax ever foisted on the American people. Look, when you look at the Senate debates on this, there's only one senator who actually has bothered to learn something about climate science, and his name is Senator James Inhofe. One of the things that disturbs me about this debate is the elected officials promoting the agenda, probably not just in this country, but in many countries, know almost nothing about climate science. Senator Inhofe spent many years holding hearings and reading books and talking to scientists, and he actually knows a lot of what he's talking about.
Peter Rowan?
One of the main points he did say was, I'm not a scientist. And yet he says that he knows everything about science. 98% of recognized scientists say climate change is man-made.
Climate change man-made, and what are the figures on that over the past decade?
Well, we are basically having the hottest year on record. Basically, there's been an increase in dramatic storms. For instance, the hurricane in the Philippines last year. So we have seen major changes in our climatic sort of weather in the world. Can't deny it.
Myron Ebel, there was a front-page story on the website of the New York Times this Thursday, which said that Barack Obama in this issue may have found a winner with voters going to 2016, that a growing majority agree with him on climate change.
Well, to go back to what we're experiencing right now, the world has not seen a statistically significant increase in the global mean temperature for 18 years. This is well known in the IPCC establishment, and they're very embarrassed by it, and they keep trying to make up reasons for why the world has not warmed for the past 18 years, even though emissions keep going up and up and up. Now, as far as a winning issue, pollsters keep asking the American people.
The polar ice caps are not melting, for instance? Is that what you're saying?
No, the Antarctic ice cap is at all-time highs. Now, is that caused by global warming? The Arctic ice cap has changed according to cycles that are well known in the Pacific and Atlantic Oceans. Similarly, the Antarctic ice cap has been growing according to cycles that are fairly well known. You'll see the Arctic coming back, and you'll probably see the Antarctic shrinking. But the fact is that this issue rates at the bottom of every poll taken in the United States and in most other countries that I've seen. The American people and people around the world rate this about as low on their list of concerns as any issue you can possibly find. So this is not a winning issue in 2016 for the Democrats.
Peter Rowan?
For the Arctic, if the Arctic is going to come back, why is Russia and everyone else claiming rights to drill in the Arctic and planning shipping routes across the Arctic. I mean, they wouldn't be doing that if it's going to freeze over more than it ever has done before.
Jean-Michel Ansky.
You know, I'm not a scientist, so I'm not going to argue on science. I think for all practical purposes, whether science is this, that, I think is now beyond the point. The moment governments, states are taking actions to reduce CO2 emissions, the issue is how do we do it and how do we make it compatible with the decent growth of the economy, or with the growth of the economy. And that's the debate before us. You know, arguing whether it's warmer or not warmer. Now, you know, the moment the United States are going into policy, China, Europe, by a long way. So is this reasonable? Is this doable? Is this compatible with the economic growth? I think that these are the real questions before us.
Is the oil industry betting on a world that's getting hotter?
Well, we are not arguing with science. We are taking the facts, saying that's being said by scientists, by the GIEC, and we are adapting to the new situation. We are not fighting the science.
All right, not fighting the science. However, there is the problem of the cost of it all and the cost of the energetic transition. We heard from Barack Obama in part one of our discussion. How about the Chinese? At the Foreign Ministry briefing this Thursday, the message was, we'll do our bit. Now, how about the West?
We
will work with other countries, including China, Brazil, South Africa, and India, to jointly implement the new agreement regarding climate change in 2015 as scheduled. We hope that developed countries will perform their duties during the process, and the international community should also make its own contribution to the effort.
The international community should also make its own contribution. Peter Rowan.
Yes. One of the things is that people were saying is that Obama shouldn't stop here. Canada said that they have pulled out of UNFCCC, United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, because they wanted to stay in sync with their neighbour, United States. The United States have now changed as of yesterday, so Canada will have to change. There's discussions now in Australia. Are they following the right line as well? This is a major agreement which has been put forward, and I think you're going to see a lot of changes over the next 12 months up to Paris next year.
What's your prediction on that, Meyer Nebel? Do you see the likes of Canada going back on their decision to pull out of those agreements?
Prime Minister Harper is very determined not to get back into this international energy rationing game. And in Australia, Prime Minister Tony Abbott won the election last year on one issue, getting rid of the carbon tax. So I think the United States is actually sticking out here, and perhaps the European Union. President Obama has made some promises which he cannot keep without Congress. Congress is going to say, no way, we aren't going to do this. So I think the negotiating position of the United States as we move towards the Paris Accord in December 2015 will be found by the international negotiators not to be credible.
So hang on, you're saying he's going to have to go to Congress. That's not what the White House is saying. They're saying that it can be just directives that are sent to the Environmental Protection Agency.
The EPA has proposed several rules to regulate power plant emissions and to cut automobile emissions. The power plant emissions are legally dubious, and they have a huge amount of opposition in Congress to them. Ultimately, you cannot persist in the executive if Congress says no, because Congress holds the purse strings to the budget. So I think you're going to find that President Obama is really out on a limb, and he's gone way beyond where the American people are and what the election results are. He hasn't listened to the election and to the American people.
So, Meyer Nebel, what's your prediction for next year's summit in Paris?
Well, we've got Lima next month, and then they'll be negotiating throughout the year furiously to come up with an agreement. I think that the United States has led the way by saying we don't want a binding treaty. We want each country to make a promise, and we'll add all those promises together and call it a treaty. If it becomes clear that the Obama administration is not credible, that they do not have the support of the Congress or the people, then it seems to me that that plan is going to be very unlikely to gel and to work out.
So you're saying it's going to be a repeat of 2009 when there was no agreement?
Well, you know, if you're just promising to do something without binding targets and timetables that are legally enforceable, you can probably cobble something together. But whether a country's promise means very much remains to be seen.
Peter Rowan?
I think you're coming back to the point where I have said that China, we can't trust China. The whole point is that if it does come down to just purely agreements, it can still work if the countries realize that.
And should those agreements be binding?
Well, Obama, I got a feeling, has realized that he can't go down that road because of the Senate, and he doesn't have, it would not get through the Senate. Republicans would stop it. So if he can actually get around it from a side road, really, to say, okay, we will just have national binding side of things and not actually have an international treaty, then that's one way of doing it. There's more than one way of skinning a cat, basically.
I want to ask Jean-Michel Lansky about the host country. Do you remember a few years back here in Paris, there was this big conference at the presidential palace. They even invited Al Gore to it, announcing all sorts of things to curb emissions and to save the environment. Whatever became of that?
Well, I was going to that. We've been talking about China and the US, but the big steps, whatever they are being taken in Europe. I mean, Europe has targets, binding targets of reducing CO2 emissions by 40%.
And they are binding.
By 2030. So it's a completely different game than what we are talking about. We're not talking about peaking and then whatever. This is going to have a very profound effect on the economy. And the worry we have, in a way, is that Europe might be pushed even further in their zeal to be the leaders of the world in that respect. And it might harm the European economy. Take France, for instance, as we are in France. The target of the new law, which was just passed in Parliament a few weeks ago, is to divide by 4 the carbon emissions by 2050. Now that's a kind of long-term target, but no one knows in Europe or in France how it can be done and whether it will be compatible with economic growth or even sustained economy. So this movement is kind of needs to be really thought of, and as far as we are concerned, we are very, looking at Europe and what can happen there.
All right. Last year, a report came out that rocked Brussels. It warned Europe could be pricing itself out of world trade with energy costs that are too high. Among those trumpeting the loudest about this, steel magnate Lakshmi Mittal. He issued a call to reform carbon caps that will spiral come Europe's next recovery. He writes, unless the EU takes action, costs will continue to rise. That could destroy the manufacturing industries that are the backbone of Europe's economy. Peter Rowan, is he right?
No. Europe spends 500 billion euros a year, basically, on importing hydrocarbons to power its economies. The United Kingdom are aiming, like France, for 80% cuts by 2050 as well. And that's a cross-party agreement.
But is it an unfair burden for heavy industries?
No, I wouldn't say it is an unfair burden because of the efficiencies and knowing that we have to achieve targets. We have to realize there is climate change and we have to do something about it. And the technologies are there. Prices are coming down for renewables and storage. In developing world is, world is 2020, developing world 2025. So the technology is there and the prices are coming down. It is doable. We can actually achieve the targets.
Well, Mr. Mittal may be wrong, I don't know, but the fact is that is going somewhere else, and as does the petrochemical industry in Europe, because the conditions of operating, the cost of energy, the CO2 emissions target are making us not competitive. As simple as that. It's not only a European issue. It's a
But
worldwide
hang on a
issue.
second, Jean-Michel Lansky, the Germans, they're pretty good at business, aren't
Sure.
they? And they're the ones who've been leading the charge for curbing carbon emissions, for making that switch to renewable energies. They're even
True.
one step ahead of this. They're shutting down their
Well-
nuclear power plants.
Well, but you know what? They're replacing nuclear power plant by coal-fired electricity generation. So their performance in terms of CO2 is far, far from being kind of, first rank.
But the UK is shutting down their coal power plants. So, for instance, Drax, which is the largest, what was the largest coal-fired plant in the UK, is switching to biomass.
But we're talking about Germany. That's not what's happening in Germany. In Germany, they are burning lignite to generate electricity.
Nonetheless, how do you feel as a Frenchman when you see how much the Germans have come along when it comes to solar power, when it comes to wind farms?
No, but I think we are doing too. The one thing is that it has to be compatible with the robustness of the economy. I think the Germans have that more than the French. That's my concern.
All right, I won't let you all get away without asking you about something that's making news around the world, which is the falling price of oil. Under $80 a barrel, the first time since 2010. Myron Ebel, how is this going to change the conversation when it comes to carbon reducing carbon emission?
When prices go down, demand goes up. We're going to see more oil consumption, just as we're seeing more global coal consumption because the price of coal is lower. And in the United States, of course, we have a natural gas boom, which is why so much of the German chemical industry is thinking of relocating to the United States in order to take advantage of our very low natural gas prices. So yes, energy prices still drive the world economy, and fossil fuels and their abundance and low price is really the basis of global prosperity. I think the reason the EU is stuck in neutral or on the verge of another recession is because of these energy rationing policies being pursued to try to squeeze fossil fuels out of the economy.
I would disagree. The UK is the fastest growing country in the OECD countries, and yet it follows the EU rules.
Follows the EU rules, and what does that falling price of oil mean?
Well, for the UK, not much, because it has its own oil, as you know, but that's on a decline. It is switching to gas, but at the same time, it is also trying to achieve targets on renewables and energy efficiency.
Jean-Michel Lansky?
Well, in a nutshell, I think with low price of oil, it will make renewable energy less competitive from a cost standpoint. So it will require more subventions from the state. So the
More subsidies.
More subsidies. Yeah, more subsidies.
You're saying it's gonna require more subsidies, but the cost of making these switching to renewable energy is also going down. We've seen it with a lot of our viewers are in Africa. They know the dipping price of solar panels, for instance.
No, it's true, but it's still not competitive with fossil fuels. So, and it was when it was 100 or 110. Now it's $80 a barrel. It will make this energy less competitive unless they are subsidized by government. It's as simple as that.
And so the hydrocarbons are subsidized by government as well. And you have to look at the subsidies which the hydrocarbon industry gets
Really?
for discoveries.
Really?
You just have to look at when they're trying to do discoveries, the blocks and the tax reliefs they get to try and discover oil in oil blocks.
No one is subsidizing oil or gas. I mean, your companies are looking for it on a private basis. Oil companies are not subsidized by any terms.
And what's your prediction on Paris next year? Will it be a face-saving measure?
Well, I think there will be some form of agreement. Now that the U.S. and China have made that move, I think there will be some. I don't know what form and shape.
And that's a good thing?
Well, globally, it's probably a good thing. Yes.
Peter Rowan?
Yep, I would agree as well. Exactly the same.
All right. I want to thank our panel, Myron Ebel for joining us from Washington, Jean-Michel Lansky, Peter Rowan for being with us. Stay with us because our Media Watch segment is next. And let's say hello to Hala Moeddin.
Hello there.
So we were just saying this is a surprise agreement. Some even brandishing it historic. And another historic first took place during Barack Obama's visit to China.
That's right. That was the fact that they actually managed to get the Chinese president to agree to take questions from the foreign press. So normally in China you have your an announcement is made and you have pre-screened questions, or you just have general announcements to the press. This was more of the traditional format that we're used to in the West, so questions from the press and answers supposedly from the two presidents. Though interestingly enough, Xi Jinping has had a rather innovative strategy when it came to the questions from the press. In fact, he decided not to answer them. This is the Shanghaiist, with its rather satirical take on what's happened. Xi Jinping takes questions from the foreign press but doesn't actually answer them. This article on BuzzFeed has been trending because the reaction to Xi Jinping's sort of refusal to answer any questions.
He actually took his earpiece out.
He took his earpiece out. So the problem was that the question came from a New York Times reporter. And of course, the New York Times has had a rather difficult relationship with China after they published a stunning expose of Chinese leaders' wealth. And so the New York Times journalists have had difficulty getting visas to work in China. The reporter asked this question, the translation happened, and then Xi Jinping took his earpiece out to signalise, OK, I'm done. In fact, we've got a clip of that. Plus, look out at the end for Obama's reaction to Xi Jinping.
Isn't it time to extend that sort of right to foreign correspondents who seek to cover your country?
是不是要给我提问题了？
Now, President Xi Jinping will take a question from a member of the Chinese press. China Daily, please.
谢谢主持人。
China Daily, please.
谢谢主持人。
So what President Xi was saying was, I'll take another question, please. Taking
from the Chinese press.
And then it was from the Chinese press. And so, but what the social media is focusing on is President Obama's reaction. They're calling it a shrug and the "what you gonna do" shrug. People are now saying that this is certainly what they're wanting to, they're going to be using the Obama shrug instead of the can you shrug. Now, we should point out that President Xi did actually answer the question in the end, saying the predictable response of journalists should respect the rules and regulations of China. Any difficulties that the New York Times has faced is because they have been, well, he's implying it's because they've been breaking the rules. The Times has lashed out with a response to President Xi, saying that, by demanding journalists to tailor their coverage, it only protects the powerful and those with something to hide. They should be able to deal with that criticism. So a stinging slap from the New York Times.
And what about on climate change itself?
OK, well, on climate change itself, what's interesting is about how it's being handled from both sides. So the reaction we've seen in the West is we're talking about it being a historic climate change deal. However, if you look at the Chinese press, I'll explain in case your Mandarin's not up to scratch, basically they're talking about the summit, but they're focusing on the photo ops. They're focusing on the anti-corruption statements that were signed. But there is no mention of the climate change deal. And that is because, as Foreign Policy and Tea Leaf Nation explains, it's, well, there's several reasons. Firstly, Chinese leaders, they say, don't enthuse. They don't, that's not their style. But it's also important to point out that President Xi is facing enormous domestic pressure at home about the air pollution that its citizens are living with. So we talk about it a lot in the Western press, but it's a real problem in China. And so by focusing attention on climate change, it's already getting reaction from netizens who are saying, why on earth are we talking about climate change? The people suffering most from climate and air are the Chinese people themselves. And if we look at some of these images, this is that's Beijing, basically a year's worth of Beijing pollution. And if you look at the image, it really is more grey than blue. So it's an enormous problem in China, but it's an enormous problem for the people who are living with it. And they're wanting to up the pressure on the Chinese authorities to deal with it. And that's something that they're struggling to do.
All right, so something you maybe shouldn't draw too much attention to, even if you're the all-powerful president of China. Hala Moeddine, I want to thank you. I want to thank our panel once again. Thank you for joining us here for the France 24 debate.